if they want to. Talk don't bother me. I want the whole wide world to know that I love you so.
And welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DeRIenzo.
And I'm Miss Joan Moossy.
And we have a great show in store for you, part two. If you were still with us, we started an hour ago with talking with Shannon Taylor, whose show is an hour earlier than ours, at 7 o'clock, The Conversation, and Leni Brenner,
Thanks for sticking around.
Famed author and historian. And we've been debating Israel and Palestine, basically, and
the situation in the Middle East,
yeah,
the
in
history,
general. It's fascinating story,
contemporary.
and both folks have very different views, and yet we managed to have a wonderful educational discussion, and I hope it's a model for the future in the Middle East, that folks can come together and have these kind of discussions and possibly iron out some of these difficulties before they reach a point, as we've seen so tragically recently in Gaza. So we are here live. Our number is on the phone, is on the screen, 212-757-1538. A little later on the show, we'll take your calls. But we want to get right to it. You can ask a question. Get right to it. I want to go to Shannon Taylor from The Conversation. Welcome again, Shannon, to Let Them Talk.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jody.
All right.
And we want to hear from you. Tell us a little bit. I mean, Gaza, I think, is a good place to start. Over 1,000 people dead, so many children, so many really heart-rendering scenes that I saw of people who died at the hands of weapons from Israel. A lot of people were pretty shocked and outraged by it, people from all backgrounds in Israel itself. How can you defend that? How is it possible to defend an action like what happened in Gaza last year?
By saying not enough. That's how. I don't need any defense for Gaza. They sent 7,000 rockets aimed at civilian population centers for the last 6 years. I was against the pullout of over 21 cities that Israel had built over 40 years ago, that every government in Israel had furthered and that America had encouraged. And Israel voluntarily ripped apart those cities, and Mort Zuckerman and others had donated the highly productive agrarian greenhouses that produce tomatoes and all other wonderful fruits to the Arabs of the community free of charge, and the Arabs simply tore them apart and ground them to dust and burned down the synagogues that had been left, the only buildings not torn down by the departing Israelis, who literally ripped apart the Jewish homes and families and their children, all of whom separated from their families, got divorced, were removed, were now jobless and cityless and stateless, and to this day haven't had new homes, all in deference to giving the Gazans a Judenrein population. And
what does that mean? Describe that to me with Judenrein.
Judenrein means that the Arabs didn't want Jews near them. And I mean, it's all right for Jews to have Arabs with them, but the Arabs couldn't have a single Jew near them. And Israel, to its shame, agreed to this. And the result was that the Arab population moved their rockets up. Hamas government moved all its rockets up and sent them willy-nilly into the civilian populations, Sderot and all other neighboring villages, willy-nilly, year in, year out, until Israel had enough, and the result was a war that Israel didn't want. And believe you me, Israel could have done far more damage. It didn't have to do all kinds of preparatory phone calls, warning block by block, we're coming here, we're coming there. What army allows in humanitarian aid? Certainly America has never done that during a war. Certainly Europe has never, and certainly no Arab country has ever allowed in humanitarian aid. As a matter of fact, the Hamas itself didn't allow humanitarian aid because it confiscated the aid that the United Nations sent.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let's go to Leni Brenner, historian and author of books including Zionism in the Age of Dictators. Tell us a little bit about your response to that.
Very good. I would remind you that about 2-3 weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal ran a huge article on how Israel had originally patronized and funded Hamas in the good old days. It started in 1979. Okay. Now, I've known this for years. I mean, it's not been a secret, but the Wall Street Journal just did it. And they compared it to the United States arming the Islamic fundamentalists in 1979, no less, in Afghanistan, all right? And they were right to compare it to that. In fact, I question which came first and which wise guy taught the other wise guy how to handle Islamic fundamentalist crackpots, okay? But, and in 1979, this kind of covert thing, you never know too many details until 100 years later, But 1979, at least a big part of 1979, Menachem Begin, a Zionist revisionist, was the prime minister. So I think it might have been more than an accident that this Islamo-fascist group, as they call them nowadays, was patronized by Israel under a Zionist revisionist group that had come out of Mussolini land. But I'll tell you what, where the Wall Street Journal, I mean, they were correct in, equating it to Afghanistan and the Americans, but there's another equation too. In 1929, in Germany, the German capitalists, when they started backing Hitler, the capitalists weren't thinking about killing Jews. I mean, that was in Hitler's mind, but not in their minds. They were looking for a kami basher, okay? And they used the kami basher against the Stalinists, who were about 12% of the vote, and the Social Democrats, who were about 36% of the vote, okay? But they weren't interested in killing Jews. But what happens is when you use a kami basher and he comes to power, you think you used him, but he thinks he used you, okay? And he goes on his own little trip, whatever it is. And that is what has happened in the case of the German capitalists backing Hitler, the American government backing the Islamic fundamentalists in Afghanistan, and the Israeli government backing Hamas against the PLO. And they were literally letting Hamas people go into the West Bank, where the PLO was strong, the left wing was strongest on the campus, and they were letting them beat up left-wing Palestinians, okay? So, yeah, in other words, let me put it this way. The big thing about the Middle East is how little Americans know about it, okay? So the most important thing that we can do, all of us here, is continue this kind of debate, and better than that even, set up websites and so on and so forth,